Flo's here. She's going to tell us what's grabbing the headlines in the French papers. Many French papers focusing on a string of defeats for the Islamic State group in Syria and Iraq. Particularly, of course, we've been talking about this takeover of Palmyra, Flo.
That's right. It's huge news here in France. The Figaro talks about how the Islamic State group is retreating on all fronts. The territory controlled by the Islamic State group in Syria and Iraq is shrinking. And Le Figaro reminds readers ISIS is not invincible, because that's something we might have forgotten recently, given its expansion in the Middle East and, of course, the recent attacks here in Europe.
In fact, Le Figaro, you found, is actually calling for a big step up now, aren't they, on military action against ISIS?
That's right. In its editorial, Le Figaro says that what we need to target now are the strongholds of the Islamic State group, so Mosul in Iraq, Raqqa in Syria, but it's not going to be a quick victory. You can see the title of the editorial here, La Longue Guerre, the long war. It has to be a war fought on several fronts, and Le Figaro warns readers, unfortunately, when you strike a viper's nest, nothing can stop venomous bites from happening elsewhere, so the fight is far from over.
But Syrian armies recapture of Palmyra, of course, a major archaeological site. It's being seen as a big symbolic victory, isn't it?
That's right. That's exactly what 20 Minutes says today. It's a symbolic victory. There's still a lot of work to be done, but this is a very important victory. There's a real sense of relief in French papers that the damage done on Palmyra wasn't as bad as people originally thought it might be. After all, it was controlled by the Islamic State group for 10 months. Le Parisien, for instance, interviews the head of Syria's antiques department, and you can see this quote here, Palmyra could have gone up into smoke. And he says that he's assessed the damage. It's not as bad as people thought it originally might be. And he actually applauds locals, people living in Palmyra. He said that their efforts were really important to save a lot of the archaeological findings there.
Good news, of course, for the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. He received a delegation of French MPs over the Easter weekend. It's a story that hasn't had that much international coverage.
That's right. It's quite interesting. 5 MPs from the Les Républicains party, so the opposition right-wing party, met with the Syrian president over Easter weekend. Among them, Thierry Mariani, who's actually calling for the EU to lift its restrictions on Syria. But Libération is very critical of this. And you can see they're talking about Palmyra and Mariani. These are gifts for Bashar al-Assad. Libération is upset with the fact that the butcher of Damascus is essentially reaping all these benefits right now. In the name of realism, a lot of people are saying that we should actually join forces with Assad, just like we did with Stalin to fight Hitler. But let's not forget, and this is a quote from Libération, that the bloody Assad regime is responsible for the majority of the 260,000 deaths that we've seen in Syria since the beginning of the uprising there. And also, it's Bashar al-Assad that's responsible for the massive exodus of millions of refugees that we've been covering for months now, of course.
Let's go back to the French newspapers, or the French news in the newspapers, shall we? The government's plan to reform the labour law is kicking off its parliamentary marathon.
That's right. The Huffington Post likens what's ahead to a relay race, kind of a hurdle race. The first hurdle is today when the minister's reform bill, so that is known as the Myriam El Khomri law, is going to be presented to MPs. Now, Thursday, major demonstrations are scheduled to be held across the country. Now, the government says that this bill is going to help fight unemployment here in France, but many trade unions say that actually it's going to be bad for workers. They're going to be on the losing end of the stick. But business representatives say that the law doesn't actually go far enough. They say the law is too shy. And so you can see the photo there of the labor minister. She's all over the press today.
So what a surprise. Nobody's happy, including the former Labour minister.
That's right, and this is quite surprising. This is François Rebsamen, you might remember him. He's actually the predecessor to Myriam El Khomri, and he gives an interview here to Les Echos where he lashes out against the El Khomri law. It's not very very nice of him, I guess you could say. You can see here this quote. It says, "Don't expect any miracles," and he says there won't be any major impact from this reform, and especially not before the end of François Hollande's presidency. Now, it must be said, he himself has drawn a little bit of criticism for criticizing the person who followed in his footsteps, because a lot of people are saying that when he was labor minister, he didn't really make any miracles himself.
And meanwhile, there is now just a little over a year to go, in fact, before the presidential election here in France. The papers are even wondering whether François Hollande is going to run again, are they?
Will he?
Will he? Won't he? Will he? It's as bad as Nicolas Sarkozy, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, according to Le Figaro, he will. He is going to run. In fact, he's preparing the ground already. Le Figaro publishes extracts from a book called Le Pari, The Bet, which focuses on his battle strategy in the lead up to the 2017 presidential election. According to this book, just like in 2012, François Hollande is actually going to turn towards the center. He's going to turn his back on the left wing, and the book says that he's actually already buried the left wing and mourned it to a certain extent. And this is certainly a criticism that you hear a lot about François Hollande, particularly from the left. A lot of people on the left say he's just not left-wing enough. And one of the people who says this the most is Jean-Luc Mélenchon. I don't know if you remember him. He's a very popular politician from the very far left party. In fact, he's going to run for the far left party in 2017. He's kind of the French Bernie Sanders, I guess you could say. In 2012, he got 11% of the vote. He could be quite a challenge for Hollande, and there's a big article about him in Libération today if you want to learn more about him.
OK, we'll talk about that afterwards, Flo. Perhaps put a bet on ourselves. Thank you very much. Flo with the French papers on France 24.